Christ followers who don't. What does it mean to be a disciple of Christ? Have we lost the meaning of what disciple means? This and more on today's Church Without Walls. Good news, folks. Payton Cam is back, so we're going to flash to Payton's artwork during the show to keep you awake, to keep you interested. You're supposed to say, "Oh, they'll stay awake." Anyway, what does it mean to be a Christ follower, and what about Christ followers who don't? And that, what I mean by that, who don't actually follow Christ, they follow their hermeneutic of the Bible, or their tribe, or John Calvin, or something like that. Here's the thing. The word disciple, if we bring it up now, people automatically relate it to Christianity, or the Christian church, or Jesus, or something, because it's become the dominant platform that uses that word. Although this wasn't the case when the word disciple was used in the first century. It simply meant student. If you said you were a disciple of Gamaliel, that meant you followed that philosophy of Judaism that Gamaliel taught as a rabbi in first century. But it simply means a student. So a disciple of Plato was somebody who believed that Plato's arguments were stronger than Diogenes. And so they basically wanted to sit under Plato, learn from him, share that teaching with others, and live that teaching. They thought that was worthy to follow. We kind of don't use the term anymore today, but we understand it in the context that it originally meant. For example, if you were building a house and your wife said to you, "Well, I want to have different architects propose their views," and so you get a guy and you're interviewing a guy, and he's in the lobby, and your secretary comes in and she says, "Well, he's a disciple of Frank Lloyd Wright." Well, a disciple of Frank Lloyd Wright, you know you're not going to get wall-to-wall carpeting, and you're not going to have wallpaper and drapes, right? You're going to have wood and stone and blinds and geometry and flat roofs. And you kind of know what you're going to get with a disciple of Frank Lloyd Wright. If you are hiring a football coach for your high school, and somebody comes in and says, "Well, this guy is a disciple of Bill Walsh," you know what kind of offense you're going to get, right? It's going to be a lot of quick passing and running off the edge. And if it's a disciple of Bill Belichick, you kind of know what you're going to get. If you're hiring a defensive coordinator and they say, "Well, yeah, he's a knockoff of Buddy Ryan," you know, well, the 4-6 defense is going to play a big role, and that particular position of safety is going to be a headhunter. Well, so if you're hiring somebody as a basketball coach and they say he's a disciple of Phil Jackson, you know that the triangle offense is going to be a big role, and you might not have the personnel for that, so that might be a good thing or a bad thing. Even if you're talking philosophy, or if you're talking religion, a disciple of Buddha is going to look very different than a disciple of Jesus. Or if you say somebody is a disciple of Lao Tzu, you know, the Tao Te Ching, you know, something like that is going to play a big role in his thinking. And you know there are basic tenets of that. If I meet a Buddhist and I'm not really familiar with Buddha, I say, "Well, what is it about Buddha's teachings that are meaningful to you? What were his main teachings that made sense to you?" If you find in the political world a disciple of Karl Marx who believes in capitalism and the open market, you're not really talking to a disciple of Karl Marx. If he believes in laissez-faire economics, that's not a disciple of Karl Marx. He's confused. Or maybe he follows one small little narrow aphorism, and he leaves the bulk of Marxist teaching out. So that you're not really a follower of Marx in that sense, and that's probably a good thing given the history of Marxism. But we understand what it means to be a follower of all these different schools of thought until we come to Christianity. And somebody says they're a Christian or they're a Christ follower, and we're still in the dark as to where they are, because there's so many different varieties, and many of the varieties oppose each other in thought, and they're as different from each other as a Christian from a Jew in some cases, or a Christian from a Muslim. So radically different in their understanding of the character of God or how God is working today, and so forth, that it's virtually unrecognizable. And so the sad thing is that Christ followers have to further define themselves to give somebody a shorthand to understanding where they are. And so we come up with these tribal labels, right? Oh, so-and-so, if you're hiring a new pastor and you're on a pastor search committee for a church, and let's say you're a Free Grace church, and you have somebody who comes in to candidate at the church, and they're a John MacArthur disciple. Well, you're going to get a Calvinist. This is a Calvinist who's a dispensationalist a tiny bit, but he's also a lordship salvationist and so forth, and believes almost in a works salvation. You know what you're going to get, as opposed to somebody who is a disciple of somebody else. So, in Christianity, we want to know more than that you follow Jesus. We want to know how you follow Jesus. And it turns out that when you dig a little deeper, you find out that maybe we're not following Jesus at all. Maybe we're following John Calvin's understanding of Jesus, or Zwingli's, or Luther's, or some modern denominations' understanding of what Paul thought of Jesus. But here's the challenge for the week for you, and really for your life, and that is to understand who you are as a disciple. If you call yourself a Christian or a Christ follower, or if you're interested in being a Christ follower, what does that mean? So here's the question, and the very difficult question some people are going to be uncomfortable asking themselves. In our new ministry, Wendy and I have been doing this really for 4 years, but officially for a year, really, because we've been intrigued by those who are leaving the church and leaving Christianity, and saddened by it, as one should be when their brother goes into the far country, or when the sheep gets lost. And looking into it, we've found that it really makes other Christians uncomfortable. It really makes the 99 sheep uncomfortable that the shepherd goes after the one. And there's a brand of Christianity, there's a number of places within Christendom that Christians really strive for certainty. They want to have pat answers for every question, and they're really uncomfortable with, quite frankly, facets of faith. Certainty is a faith killer, not a faith grower. And so doubt and faith have more in common than certainty and faith. But Christians want to have an answer to everything, and it makes people really uncomfortable to ask difficult questions. This is going to be one of those questions that makes people uncomfortable. And it's a very simple question, and it's a question your kids might ask you, or it's a question that people who don't know much about the Christian faith may ask you, and that is, as a Christ follower, what does that mean? What teachings of Jesus have shaped your life? So ask yourself these things and write it down and make it private. I mean, right now, if you're listening in your living room, and let's say it's a husband and wife, or even a husband and wife with a couple kids on the floor drawing like Payton is, if you're listening from home right now, don't ask your wife this question. Regard her privacy. Don't put her on the spot. We've met, Wendy and I have met so many Christians who love putting other Christians on the spot to flaunt their arrogance or where they are. They want to flaunt their spirituality, and so they try and put other Christians on the spot. I had a teacher in my old church who used to love to do this, and when he'd fill the pulpit for me, I constantly had to gently rebuke him and say, don't ask the church questions that you know they can't answer. It's rude. It's arrogant. And it doesn't come off as you're a loving shepherd. It's just hard for this guy to learn that. But anyway, don't be that guy. Take this privately and ask yourself this. What teachings of Jesus Christ have been influential to me? But ask the question beyond that. The more important question is, what were the main teachings of Jesus Christ? Now, if I ask a college student what were the main teachings of Karl Marx, he's going to give me A, B, and C. And if he studied Marx, or if he's read the Communist Manifesto, other things, he's going to basically know the main tenets of communism. If I ask somebody, that coaching prospect, what are the main tenets of the triangle offense, or of Bill Walsh's offense, or the run and shoot, or the 46 defense, if somebody is knowledgeable about it, they're going to lay it out, A, B, and C. This is what Buddy Ryan taught, right? Pressure on the quarterback, bring the safety up to stop the run, blitz from 7 different positions. I mean, it's pressure, and you're going to know that. And somebody who stumbles over that doesn't really know Buddy Ryan or the 46 defense, and you could dismiss them right away. But with Christianity, you ask a Christian, what were Christ's main teachings? Boy, do they struggle. And I'm saying don't do this, but in the cases where I've seen this done, I've seen pastors struggle with this because they've gone to seminary, and they've gone to a particular tribal seminary because they wanted to become great Calvinists and not great Christians. And they could tell you all about John Calvin. They could tell you all about Tulip. Or they could tell you all about the regular Baptist confession, or the Belgic confession, or the Westminster's shorter catechism. They know all about the confession of faith of their tribe. But when you ask them about Jesus, they get confounded. Now, this is astounding. This is astounding. You should be able to ask a child about Jesus, and they'd be able to tell you something. I'm just going to share a couple conversations that I overheard. I wasn't necessarily a part of, but that I have overheard that were fascinating to me. This came up in a setting of a number of pastors, and to see the pastors struggle as we went from seat to seat was pretty powerful. But at one point, somebody said righteousness. Well, Jesus taught righteousness. Now, you know the old saying that there's no dumb questions? I don't believe that. I believe there are some foolish questions. I believe the leading question is foolish, or at least duplicitous. But we can get into this another day. But if there are no stupid questions, there certainly are stupid answers or lazy answers. And I think one lazy answer about what did Jesus teach is righteousness, because virtually everyone believes what they're teaching is the right way or the right path. So righteousness, if somebody says righteousness, you have to say something like, well, or if you're writing down righteousness right now, don't be lazy. What was right in Jesus' teaching that sets it apart from what was right in Buddha's then, or in Muhammad's? I mean, what was right about Jesus' teaching? How does it differ from what Judaism of the first century was teaching? Because Jesus confronted that Judaism when he said many times, you've heard it said, but I say. And he'd follow up with something that contradicted their default thinking on that subject. One of the main reasons he was killed. So here again, folks, this is the only thing I care about you getting out of today, other than whatever Payton's going to share with you in a minute. And let's see it coming together. It's kind of cool. It's a brunette, with blue shoes. Oh, no, she's got blue hair when you look close. Pretty fascinating. All right, here's the thing. Just ask yourself this. Why am I a follower of Christ? What is it about the teaching of Jesus that has intrigued me? But the ultimate question I want you to answer is, what are the main teachings of Jesus? Now, I've heard people answer faith, hope, and love, right? As if Jesus wrote 1 Corinthians 13. Now, some people who have the verbal plenary inspiration idea of the Bible will say, Jesus did write 1 Corinthians 13. He whispered in Paul's ear. And I would just say to that, well, that's what Paul took from Christ's teaching, right? Faith, hope, and love. I mean, the things that Paul wrote were what Paul took from Christ's teaching. So what teachings of Christ do you think led Paul to write Faith, Hope, and Love? And the greatest of these is love. Now, that's a worthy question. And if you're a follower of Christ, you should be able to point to a moment in his life or teaching, which is contained in the Gospels, where Jesus taught faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love. I'm going to give you one example to make it easy in a second. If you think of Jesus' teaching, and this is what I'd like you to do, not just over the next week, over the next year, over the next decade. I think this should be at the very front of our understanding. If we are disciples of Christ, shouldn't we know what those teachings are, what those doctrines are? What are the doctrines of Jesus Christ? Not of your church, not of your tribe, not of your confession of faith. What are the teachings of Jesus? And then you can ask the harder question: Does my tribe or my confession of faith really live up to that? Does it get it right? Is it getting it right now? And over the next few weeks, we'll explore where some people may not be. Some people may be Christ followers who don't follow Christ because they're following. Here's an example. They're following Ezra because Ezra's in the Bible. See, you could be biblical without being Christ-like. And that's why the Bible is a cop-out for many people. They can point to a chapter and a verse and say, see, I'm being biblical. And they don't realize that Christ confronted that in his own teaching. And he doesn't want you to follow Ezra or Elisha. He wants you to follow him. He said, follow me to his disciples as I pick up my cross. He didn't say follow Elisha as he took up his sword. So if you start quoting Elisha, if you start quoting the prophets in defense of your ministry or your Christian worldview, you're not following Jesus. You're following the Bible, your corner of the Bible that appeals to you, whether it's appealing to what the Holy Spirit is in tune with or your own personal sin preference is something that you got to figure out. But so here's the question. What were the teachings of Jesus, the main teachings of Jesus? Now, I mentioned the Apostle Paul here, and it's fascinating. When you look at the disciples or the apostles of Jesus, when you look at the students of Jesus who followed him, you could see where the faithful bear out his teachings. And I want to give you one example today that I think is found in Paul that was just revolutionary, because Jesus was a revolutionary figure. This is why they killed him. But one of the things Jesus taught, and I don't want to make this sound like it's small. It's not small. It's bigger than it sounds, but was the community of mankind. Now, I know there are liberal churches that'll take that and make it, sugarcoat it, make it seem like here's where we cue, kumbaya around, some campfire. Are you erasing? Mozart? Are you erasing something, or is this part of you adding texture to your picture? Okay, texture.
I'm adding something and then I'm making it lighter, kind of.
Okay, all right. So, where were we? A community. Jesus taught radical community. He taught a racist people how to think outside their boundaries and their understanding of who their brother was. And so when you get a question to Jesus like, who is my neighbor? And Jesus tells you the story of the Good Samaritan, that's a radical story. We've reduced it to a pastel, flannel graph kind of Aesop's fables where we don't even wince at it when we deliver it in a Sunday school setting or something now. But the Jew hearing the story of the Good Samaritan would probably get furious, right? It would be like if a pastor today told the story of the good transgender, right? The good transgender, where a transgender person somehow came to the rescue of somebody beaten after, Franklin Graham and Robert Jeffress passed by and didn't pay him any heed. That would anger most Christians. When Jesus told the story of the Good Samaritan, it would anger most Jews because Jews hated Samaritans. It would be the story of like the good Muslim. If Jesus was here today and he told the story of the good Muslim, people would hate to hear that the Christian passed by and the Christian church passed by. And then the Muslim stopped and helped the neighbor. And Jesus would ask that man, who's probably steam pouring out of his ears and his nostrils and all of his orifices. And Jesus asked that man, who was this man's neighbor? And he'd have to say, well, the Muslim was. But he wouldn't say the Samaritan. Notice he didn't say the Samaritan in the story. He said, he who came to the man's aid. Because he couldn't even get himself to say the Samaritan because they hated Samaritans. So in Paul's life, how did this teaching, the teaching of Jesus that, no, there's a brotherhood of man, how did that teaching inspire the Apostle Paul? Well, Paul was a Pharisee of Pharisees. He was racist in a number of ways. He was a bigot in a number of ways. And as a matter of fact, the daily prayer of the Pharisee during the time of Paul was a prayer of gratitude that wasn't. It was, Lord, I am grateful that you didn't make me a woman, that you didn't make me a slave, and that you didn't make me a barbarian. In other words, I'm thankful I'm a man, I'm free, and I'm a Jew. That was the prayer. And they'd say this about 5 times a day. So when Paul is moved by the real Christ, when he's reshaped, when he's transformed, not just on the Damascus Road, but following in his taking up his own cross and following Jesus, he takes that prayer and turns it on its head in a number of occasions. And so now you find in the teachings of Paul, you find that in the body of Christ, in the family of God, another way of saying the family of God, in the family of God, there is no Jew or Greek. That's an unnecessary division. We've grown beyond that. In the family of God, there is no slave or free. In the family of God, there is no male or female. See, all those divisions were very real in first century Paul. Actually, they're very real in 21st century Baptist churches. If you're trying to say to a Baptist board to allow a woman on the board of deacons or the board of elders, or to allow a woman to teach in that church, they're going to give you a chapter and verse from the Bible, but they're not following what Paul said, that in the body of Christ there's no male nor female. There's certainly male or female in certain corners of modern Christianity, but there was in the first century as well, in first century Judaism. And in the synagogue even, we didn't sit with our wives and our children under 12. They sat across the aisle, right? There was a court of the Gentiles in the temple. Jesus Christ is breaking down the walls that parted us. If your Christianity is putting walls up, and all tribalism does, you're not following Christ. You're following John Darby or C.R. Stam or Les Feldick or John Calvin or Martin Luther or Pope Francis or Augustine, or I could keep going. And people can actually tell me why they're followers of those people. But when I ask them why do they follow Jesus, or if they're in a position to say what were the teachings of Jesus, there's a struggle, and there shouldn't be. Modern academics could tell you the main teachings of Jesus, and they'd probably start with the Beatitudes. Blessed are they. We could look at some of those, but let me stay with Paul for a second. So Paul's teaching about Christ's statement that community goes beyond your prejudice was radical. Paul's teaching of the Good Samaritan was radical. Paul offering the prayer on a number of occasions that there, in the family of God, there is no division between male and female. There is no division between slave and free. And he taught the church to follow these prescriptions because he rebuked the Corinthian assemblies for seating the rich in better seats and letting them be first in line at the buffet. He rebuked that kind of attitude when he saw it even in Peter in the Antioch church, right? And he brings this out in Galatians. So Paul tried to live up to what he preached because it was remarkable to him. Jesus Christ and his following Jesus Christ and his understanding of the doctrines of Christ radically changed Saul of Tarsus. Radically. From a bigot to somebody who was open to an understanding that the family of God is much bigger than what our isms have led us to believe. Even if that ism is Christianity, our variety. And so is this true in your life? Do you have this understanding of what Jesus tried to communicate about the radical nature of the family of God or of community? So Paul goes to Mars Hill on the Areopagus, and he's confronted with Greek and Roman culture, particularly in the form of Epicurean philosophy and Stoic philosophy. And he comes among these others, and he says, we're not other. He uses their own sources. He quotes their own poets. By the way, one of them who was homosexual. So Paul quotes a homosexual in a sermon in a good way. You ever see that happen these days? But he basically says, we're children of God. We all got the same dad. We all come from the same place. And what is separating us, right? So Paul makes this argument about the family of God on Mars Hill to a bunch of people that would make Christians of today, of the West, very uncomfortable to see them as our brethren, to see them as a brother we should be the keeper of and not a destroyer of or a rebuker of. So Paul approaches them as a brother. He's approaching them as a brother, and he reaches out to them as a brother. And this is the radical nature of Christian community. This is something Jesus taught. It was radical in his day. It made Jews hate him, because it would be like today if I told you, what about the centurions? If you look at the centurions, right, in the New Testament, every time a centurion is mentioned, it's in a good light. They were the Stasi of first century Judea, right? They were the secret police. They were like the KGB. And Jesus speaks well of them, and the writers of the New Testament speak well of them. So it would be like me writing a story today or sharing a parable in a sermon today where the hero of the story is somebody from the IRS. It wouldn't be popular in a lot of people's ears. It would not be popular in a lot of people's ears. And to be honest with you, 21st century America is a lot like first century Judea. We're completely marinated in politics is more important than spirituality. So much so that we can't break free of that binary. I had a peer share an article this morning that I saw. And quite frankly, it was disappointing. It was somebody who said, if you sat with Jesus Christ on the day after the election, would you be able to justify your vote to him? And he was making an argument for one of the two gentlemen that's running. Basically that if you vote this guy, you could justify your vote, but if you vote that guy, you can't. And I've seen this argument by Christians on both sides. They say you can't possibly vote that way if you're a Christian. But I want you to think of something, right? This gentleman was arguing against the very fundamentalist view. He's saying if you voted for Donald Trump, you can't justify that in front of Jesus and you'd be ashamed. And yet he thinks if you could vote for Joe Biden, you could justify that, which is fascinating to me because here's the thing. If I'm sitting next to Jesus the day after the election and I'm talking about a mere temporal American election with Jesus, I'm still an idolater. I imagine Jesus would brush off that stupid conversation and take it somewhere deeper. Because how often do you see Jesus talking about Tiberius Caesar? And maybe the time he did say render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, it was in response to a trap question by something others brought up. But Jesus didn't talk about Tiberius Caesar or the Roman government or even the Sanhedrin that much. He had bigger things to talk about. And I guarantee you, if you're sitting with Jesus the day after an election, you're going to be sitting in front of someone who makes you forget all the temporal things that you think are so important right now, that you think are on page 1 of the newspaper and not stuck in some lower paragraph of page 26. But I guarantee you, if you sat with Jesus the day after the election, you're not going to be talking about the election. And if you are of all men most miserable. But just the very idea that question is framed that way shows you how sick we have become and how little faith we really do have and how much faith we put in princes and politics and parties and legislatures, as if we have completely forgotten the teachings of Jesus to take up our cross and follow him, in spite of what we think are the real priorities around us. I mean, how much of the Apostle Paul's preaching? Look at the New Testament. How much of it was spent on politics? A little bit in Philippi just to justify Christian liberty, or Roman liberty, that is. But not a lot. They don't spend a lot of time on that stuff, right? Because they have their priorities right. They realize there are things that are more important than these temporal things that people get caught up in. So my question to you again, I'm going to reiterate it. Cut to Payton. Here's my question again. What were the teachings of Jesus? What are the main teachings of Jesus? And when I ask you that, I'm not asking you for the main teachings of the Apostle Paul or of John the Apostle or of whatever else there is in the New Testament. I'm asking you, what are the main teachings of the rabbi you say you follow? Christ is in the name of what your identity is. So what were the teachings of Christ, period, or question mark? And then you can ask, well, what are the teachings of Christ that most influence me? Jesus Christ taught, what profit does a man have who gains the whole world and loses his soul? That's a teaching of Jesus. Let's look at another powerful passage that you would be fine to say this is maybe one of the main teachings of Jesus. And it comes from what is known as the Beatitudes. And he opened his mouth and began to teach them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall be shown mercy. Blessed are the poor in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely on account of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." I know many Christians who would dismiss that teaching and say, well, that's not for us today. That was for the people who heard it when Jesus said it, and it'll be for the people in a future kingdom age, but that's not for us today. As if blessed are the meek no longer applies. Well, I got to tell you something. If the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus overrules that, I don't see that in Scripture. As a matter of fact, I could see this teaching play out in the disciples of Christ, at least for a few centuries in the early church. Even though we don't see it play out today, even though the teaching of turn the other cheek or walk the extra mile, all these things might not be popular with American Christendom today. So, So here's the question. What were the teachings of Jesus? What were the teachings of Jesus? You could go on to say that influenced Paul and John and so forth in the rest of the New Testament. But you call yourself a Christ follower. In what way are we following Christ? Are you following Christ? Or are you following the regular Baptists? Or the irregular Baptists? Are you following, your ism or your ist, or something that's just very foreign to the idea of what a disciple means? We know what a student of Gamaliel would look like. We know what a student of Bill Walsh would look like. But why is a student of Jesus Christ so mysterious? Was his teaching not clear? I mean, after all they said about him, no one has taught with such clarity like this. No one has taught with such command and confidence as this man. But you'd find out if you do a survey of Christians today, it's pretty unclear. It's pretty unclear whether we're following Christ or we're following our particular favorite teacher that we've heaped up to itch our ears. That quite frankly may be completely contradicting the words and the teaching and the life and the ministry and the work of Jesus Christ. All right. Are you almost ready? Yes, you're almost ready, or yes, you're ready?
Now I am ready.
Now you're ready. So we're going to, see what Payton's doing. She's folding it up into like a fan kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And now, okay, that's all yours.
My second thing, but
Go ahead.
My first thing. So this is a picture of a princess, and she's floating on air because she's a cloud princess and she's in the sky. And she's looking at the sun because that's another one of her superpowers. She could look at the sun because she lives in the clouds. And she floats like a cloud, I already told you. But see, she has blue hair like rain. That's a storm cloud. And she has blue shoes like rain. And then she has blue eyes like rain. And then she has a gray stormy dress like a storm cloud.
Remember, we met somebody named Rain. Or we met a character in some show we watched named Rain, and we were like, that's a cool name. Is this princess, is her name Rain?
Yeah.
This is Princess Rain, the storm princess. The princess of the storm, right? She's a cloud princess, and she looks like she's kind of like surfing on the cloud. Is she surfing, or?
Well, she's like being floating like a cloud. You know how clouds float? Yeah. She could float.
And so one of her superpowers is she could look at the sun without going blind, right? Mm-hmm. That's pretty awesome, Paul.
Yeah.
All right. I guess that's it for you today. I really do think that it should be something relatively easy for us to say, what were the main teachings of Jesus? And this is how they play out in my life and ministry. And I think that's the most important question that a Christ follower needs to answer before they move on, because I know a lot of people who are proficient in their Christianity who are not proficient in Christ. And I know a lot of people who are proficient in their ism or their, in their isms and their ists that are not proficient in what Christ taught. And so one of the things that is very healing to people who have been through the roller coaster of their Christian faith and who might be getting off and looking for a barf bag is to focus or to be occupied with Christ and to forget to dismiss all the distractions and everything Grandpa taught us or Dad or our Sunday school teacher or our community of faith, and ask the question, well, what did Jesus teach? Who is Jesus in his word and deed? And let me get back to who Jesus is. And this will help bring you clarity, and it might just save your faith. And so one of the things, if you're going through right now a struggle in your faith, and if I ask you why, and the 5 things you list off mostly have to do with your church and your upbringing and what you were told about God and Christ in the Bible, I would ask you, before you give up on that faith, to look at it in a different manner and to free yourself from those shackles that have that have opened wounds on you. Take off those shackles, walk away from it, because walking away from your faith might be the only way that you see the true Christ. As my good friend said, sometimes people have to leave Christianity to find Christ. And so maybe you're in a toxic form of Christianity and you've been traumatized by it. It's not Jesus. I would just say to you, don't throw out Christ with your Christianity, because the odds are that even if the people meant well in what they were telling you, that the odds are that we've all got it wrong a little bit. And one of the ways we can help revive our faith or fan our faith or to see Christ again is to focus on Christ and not our church or our pastor or the abusive rules that we grew up under. Just try and put that to the side as you grow and weigh Jesus Christ and weigh his words. And then see if that system that has harmed you so much actually lived by those words, or if they actually deny them while they're trying to say, if they, the Bible is filled with God saying to the Jews of the Old Testament, you praise me with your lips, but your whole being rejects me and who I am. So I don't want your offerings and your sacrifices and your prayers, because my name is shamed in the world because of your behavior. Now, if that was true all throughout the Bible, in the Old Testament, and by the way, the letters of Jesus to the churches say the same thing. Paul's rebuke to errant churches say the same thing. So there have always been people that take the Lord's name in vain. They wear the Christian badge or the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and everything they do and say denies that family identity. So we have to be wise enough to discern and to weigh, is the Spirit really of Christ, or is this a counterfeit? Is this something that has infiltrated the family of God and posed as family of God, and it's actually something that is contrary to the family of God? I'll leave you with that. Have a blessed week, and we'll see you next week, folks.